Hello Adam's child, welcome to this sermon that goes over 10 things older Fallout games used to have that should be brought back and included in new Fallout games like Fallout 5, which should come out around the year 2047. These are actually going to be relatively minor things that could easily be implemented, so nothing like good writing or better story or things of that nature. There are plenty of other videos for such topics. Let me know which of these you agree with as we crank up the rads and get to RadKing's top 10 dumb things that need to be brought back. We are coming in hot with the single most important point in this entire video. More important than better skills, dialogue, story, or characters, the single most defining part of the original games that have been missing since Fallout Tactics are groin shots. Forget meaningful choices, player freedom, and interesting end slides. To reinvigorate the series and bring back what made people love the originals, we need to be able to go full RoboCop and shoot people in the dick. Maybe it's not quite that important, but hear me out here. Before VATS was known as VATS, it was called aimed shot in Fallout, Fallout 2, and Tactics, and allowed for more precise shooting at the cost of a little extra AP. Amongst the targetable areas were the legs, arms, torso, head, eyes, and groin, and targeting these different areas would have different effects. The groin had a higher chance of a critical hit, chance to ignore armor, and knockdown or knockout effects than the legs, arms, or torso, but groin shots weren't quite as damaging or effective as head or eye shots. Still, on a relatively low roll, it could induce a penalty of -3 endurance on our poor target, and is perfectly justifiable to get a chance at a critical, or if you need to de-wiener Fallout 2's biggest piece of crap, Myron.
I did so make jet? Well, you think this lab is for show?
Yeah, this guy had it coming. Although not as useful as a head or eye shot, the satisfaction of decapitating the little head for NPCs that are particularly contemptible was just too good. With the transition of aimed shot to VATS from Fallout 3 onwards, some things were preserved, some were changed, and a lot was added. Although VATS was implemented to help shore up the lackluster shooting controls, and as a perfectly workable way for those that aren't accustomed to or lack confidence in first-person shooting, we are able to target legs, arms, torsos, and heads. But eyes, and most notably the groin, is no longer possible. With how much Bethesda has put into VATS through the games, giving us cinematic action shots, allowing for targeting throwable explosives like grenades, and even special finishing moves for melee or unarmed attacks, they absolutely can and should bring back groin shots with unique effects and animations. Also, if we have an entire quest in Fallout 3 called Gotta Shoot 'em in the Head, where our reward hinges on us taking down targets with a shot to the head by Adam, why can't we have the same thing before the groin? If you have played any of the titles from Fallout 3 to the present, you have likely encountered doors. Yes, maybe you've heard of them, maybe you haven't, but doors are a thing in Fallout and have been since the first game. What you might not know about these so-called doors is that in the original games, if you didn't have a high enough lockpick skill to get through one, there were other options. Lockpick sets, or electronic lockpicks, could boost the lockpick skill. Planted explosives like dynamite and C4 can be placed nearby non-fortified doors to blow them off their hinges, and in Fallout 2, grenades and other small explosives can blow up wooden doors, and it's hilarious to blow a door off its hinges with a rocket launcher and then just saunter inside and talk to people like nothing weird just happened. Just another day in the wasteland. Some weaker doors can be bashed with a weapon or punched and kicked into opening, although admittedly this is the least reliable method of all, with a little message that said we didn't even scratch the door, but hey, it's still an option. There's even a door or two where a crowbar can be used to pry it open, no lockpicking necessary at all. Really, what was great about getting through doors in the early games was that you weren't forced to only use lockpicking, or hacking if the door wasn't attached to a terminal. The early games allowed for multiple approaches in case your builds didn't emphasize lockpicking. The reason this made the list rather than a dozen other examples of diverse problem solving or using different unique builds to achieve a similar result is because of the propensity of newer Fallouts, mostly Fallout 3, but all the newer ones are guilty of this in differing amounts, to have some of the flimsiest wood doors with big panes of glass stand between you and whatever is on the other side. Treasure? Quests? Nuclear waste? You know how it is in Fallout. You see a locked door and you suddenly have an unhealthy compulsion to do whatever you need to do in order to see what's inside, even if it's just a multi-tool and some garbage. Fallout really ruined me. I didn't used to be like this, you know. What is somehow even more egregious than being stopped dead by a wooden door with large glass panes is getting stopped by a halfway broken wooden door that is locked. I know it's only an average lock, and there's a very good chance that this is a joke from the developers. This is Fallout after all. They place skeletons that insinuate some poor old chap got his junk stuck in a fan. We aren't exactly stepping into highbrow humor over here. Although the game logic can be a bit hard to process regarding a half-destroyed door that can keep us locked out, or a wood door with glass panels that can be a successful barrier against super mutants who are hunting down Initiate Peck in Fallout 3, just from a choice standpoint, we should have more options to get through doors based on our build. Wood doors should be able to be hacked down with a melee weapon, or blown off their hinges. Some metal doors should be able to be breached with explosives as well, and really only the strongest blast doors should be unbreachable by conventional methods. If I can use various skill checks in conversations with NPCs, let us do what we used to do in early Fallouts and give us more options with doors in the newer games. Radaway. It's an abomination before Adam for those weak of spirit and has been a part of the series from the very first game. Although it has remained remarkably similar in form and function to its first iteration, being some sort of IV drip that the player can use to rid them of Adam's holy glow, there is one thing that has changed, and I wish it hadn't. In Fallout, Fallout 2, and Tactics, all Radaway had a certain % chance of addiction, like most chems in the games. The chance was not small either, a 10% chance, so 1 in 10 applications had a statistically significant chance of causing the addiction or Radaway craving, but admittedly it had pretty tame effects. It just lowered radiation resistance for 10 to 20 days and made us feel nauseous. You know what makes me feel nauseous? Watching all you filthy Radaway users. Disgusting. Since Fallout 3, Radaway has been a consequence-free chem to wash out all that lovely radiation and is seen as a necessary chem for so many in the irradiated wasteland. That makes it all the more necessary, in my opinion, to have some sort of potential consequence for its use, even if it is not all that severe in-game. Radaway is often one of the first chems to be used other than stim packs and would be a low-risk introduction to the addiction mechanics in the games. Depending on the effects, it could give people legitimate pause as they balance the potential downsides to having a wee bit of Adam's glory in their bodies, similar to when we use any other chem in the game. What is perhaps most interesting about all this though is that Radaway Addiction does canonically exist in later Fallouts, at least in Fallout 3. Although it isn't seen in-game, the Vault Dweller Survival Guide for the Game of the Year edition describes 2 brothers in the Pit DLC. They are gladiators of a sort fighting in an arena called The Hole, where pit raiders force slaves to fight each other or other bloodthirsty raiders. The Bear Brothers, as they are called, are described as suffering from Radaway addiction and are the only ones to be described as such in any game since Fallout 2. Interestingly, this has the effect of making them invulnerable to the radiation traps in the hole. Apparently, they just consume so much that radiation is no longer a concern for them, but since it is established as an in-universe phenomenon, and it used to be a mechanic for players, and would give some sort of consequence to wanton Radaway use that everyone recklessly engages with, I think Radaway Addiction should make a comeback. Choice and consequence has been a huge part of the Fallout series from the very beginning, and although fans will argue who did it best and where, there is no doubt that huge, story-defining choices are still made by the player, and we should get better recognition for it. See, in the olden days of the 1990s, when I was a wee little rad lad, Fallout and Fallout 2 had something called reputation titles. Like most things, Fallout 2 expanded on the first Fallout and therefore had a lot more. But these reputations would be earned by the player after engaging in certain activities, and once they earned these, they couldn't be unearned, mostly. It makes sense once you realize what some of these reputations are. A notorious one that has been spoken of many times is the child killer reputation, which requires one to, This reputation was understandably extreme, and earning it would have pretty severe in-game effects. The player would start to encounter bounty hunters when traveling during random encounters, and they would level up with the player, meaning they were usually always a threat and a pain in the butt to deal with. Additionally, most NPCs would dislike you, recognizing you for the horrible deeds that you had committed, and so most dialogue would start off with a penalty, making it more difficult to work with people through dialogue. That is the exact kind of thing we would expect if there was someone that rolled into town with such an awful reputation, and it provides something substantial over just the nebulous, these things good, these things bad karma systems of some games, or defining all actions by how a faction would view it. Although not all reputations in the early games were consequential, Gravedigger, for example, is received if we dig up graves, which I've never done, and although the reputation gets assigned, it has no real effect. However, one can get all sorts of reputations. Champion for killing bad guys, Berserker for killing good guys, Slaver, Gigolo, Prizefighter, Married, Separated, Porn Star, or Made Man, which meant that you were a bigwig within one of the crime families in Norino after helping them. Essentially, they reflected choices that were so important that they would stand out amongst the rest of the Wastelanders, whether for good or for ill. Often, in the newer games, choices can be papered over easily by doing the opposite thing for a while. In Fallout 3, blowing up Megaton and killing nearly everyone that once called it home has a large karma penalty, but give enough purified water to water beggars, and it's like nothing ever happened. In Fallout New Vegas, you can do a certain amount of negative actions towards a faction and then push it back into neutral territory by doing a bunch of good, but it is more complex than Fallout 3 because you can never fully redeem yourself. In Fallout 4, we can go around and massacre Brotherhood patrols and then report to Maxon like nothing ever happened. And Fallout 76 has some similarities and differences to all of these systems. With the introduction of human NPCs, our reputation within the Settler faction or Raider faction can be helped or hindered depending on our actions and how we do their associated quests. We face no penalties for blowing away random Raiders and Settlers outside of their settlements, and all Raiders and Settlers are completely invulnerable in their main settlement. Just look at how they bend reality and deflect these bullets. Although reputation can go up or down when doing their quests, once max affinity is reached for either of these factions, it can never be lowered or lost, no matter what you do. In any game though, certain things absolutely should have an in-game effect because of how impactful they are. Obviously, destroying Megaton should be a black stain on any record, no matter how much good you do. Similarly, returning from the Sierra Madre Casino in New Vegas should give you a reputation that you were able to claim the legendary treasure hidden there, and therefore become a target for everyone else. In Fallout 4, being friendly towards all the organized crime and chem running should get you labeled as associated with various crime or raider groups, and there are plenty of examples, but I think that's enough to drive home the point. It doesn't matter how good we end up being. If we nuked Megaton, there should be some people that will never forgive us. Let us work within the larger karma or faction reputation systems, but be able to earn ourselves marks that cause the world to treat us differently as our reputation precedes us for the big, impactful decisions that we make. Alright, that was a little too serious for my taste, so let's bring it back to something light and refreshing. Now that is what I'm talking about. This beautiful beast before you is a Centaur, the incredible combination of FEV and sentient organisms combined in a beautiful blend of form and functionality. She's beauty and she's grace, she's only looking for a date. Centaurs have featured from the beginning of the series and were seen in each Fallout until Fallout 4. Previously, they functioned as something akin to an attack or watchdog for super mutants, which made even more sense because they used to also have a dog head in addition to a human one. Although their looks have changed, which is understandable, since they are essentially a jumble of whatever animals or beings are subjected to FEV, they have been completely replaced with mutant hounds since Fallout 4. I'm not going to argue for for or against either one, since they both function very similarly, essentially being super mutant pets, but there is something about the grotesqueness and horrific look of the Centaurs that just really sells both the horrific nature and capabilities of FEV and leans into the horror-like feel of so many of the games and their setting. Fallout 76 even brought an old FEV creature back, floaters. And if they could be absent for several games before popping up again, why can't Centaurs? There is also no reason for the Centaurs to get replaced completely by mutant hounds. They can both exist side by side, especially given that the Centaurs have a ranged attack. Truth be told, I just want these ugly little mofos back, and there's no great reason not to. The first Fallout introduced something that Fallout 2 would go on to perfect, and no game has come remotely close to ever since. Intelligence is one of several special stats that your character is based on, and generally speaking, high intelligence is desirable because of the in-game advantages, and generally speaking, we don't like to think of ourselves as stupid. In the first two Fallouts, the developers went the extra mile though and introduced dumb, funny, barely understandable, low intelligence dialogue that is only available if your character has low intelligence. Going through and scripting every important NPC interaction with a low intelligence alternative is an impressive show of conviction on the developer's part. But more than changing the dialogue, it changes how the game is played. In the first Fallout, a low intelligence build actually makes a lot of dialogue inaccessible, and much of the side quest content is unavailable because if you can't communicate adequately with people, how can you ask questions or accept quests? Why would they trust us with doing an important task if they think we have brain damage? We can't even get any companion to join us except for Dogmeat. But not all hope is lost. Some NPCs will take pity on us after realizing we aren't firing on all cylinders, sometimes gifting us small items. And we can even get 50% off the intelligence boosting surgery that now only costs 3,000 caps. Wow, what a deal. Really the best a low intelligence run has to offer though is in Fallout 2, where in addition to many of the same things from the first game, there are two instances when your dummy of a character can actually speak eloquently. When speaking with a similarly low intelligence character, Tor and Klamath both can operate on a similar wavelength and articulate complex ideas and thoughts to one another without any issue. Similarly, AHS-9, the leader of the Hobologists in San Francisco, can speak to us without any problems after we undergo an alignment. We will also be at risk of being forced to become a slave or servant in Vault City if we let an NPC named Skeeve, nice name, trick us into servitude and a life dedicated to cleaning the old vault. The intelligent Deathclaws in Vault 13 will take pity on us and let us into their vault after determining that we pose no threat. And our character will be completely unable to gamble at the casinos since they don't understand any of the games, and they think that the game of craps is just something we do in our pants. Seriously, some of the low intelligence dialogue and NPC responses are so funny, and I was just cackling my way through interactions, but there are just simply too many good ones to mention them all. Taking a step back, although these don't represent what I would consider the full Fallout experience, since so much side content becomes unavailable, it remains true to a core part of the series, which is choice, consequence, and feeling like we are living in a reactive world, and the low intelligence dialogue is a perfect example. Upon learning of this unique experience, many people may feel the urge to boot up another game to see what it's like, and that is a sign of a well-made game. None of the later Fallouts even come close. A low intelligence stat in Fallout 3 has a few unique interactions, like Dean Dewey, the Protectron in Roosevelt High School, which will escort, quote, special needs children to their class. Fallout 4 and 76 have very few speech options tied to low intelligence, and New Vegas, unsurprisingly, does the best of the 3D games, although again, it is not even close to the early Fallouts. A low intelligence character can smash a bunch of buttons at the RepCon test facility when helping Jason Bright and his ghouls launch in their rockets, which will accidentally improve their launch trajectories. A low intelligence character can also scream the correct password by complete chance in the RepCon headquarters when they are confronted by the mobile facial recognition scanners that roam the premises. Lastly, one specific companion, Arcade Gannon, will actually take pity on our poor brain capacity and volunteer to accompany us, since Freeside, and indeed the Wasteland as a whole, is extremely dangerous even for those that can string together more than a few words. I want to see these games react to us, whatever that may mean, and in the case of a low intelligence build, that is best exemplified in the earlier games than the later ones. Give me fun or interesting reasons to click New Game just one more time to try out some wacky low intelligence build that shows that the developers think about and love the world that they created. There has been a recent creep through the games, and no, I'm not talking about Myron, but the specter of invincibility that seems to get worse with each game. Put simply, new Fallout titles have a lot more essential NPCs that cannot be killed because they are seen as essential to the story, and it's more than ever before. The earliest of the games didn't have a single non-killable character except for the Overseer for Vault 13, and even then it was only temporary because he can be killed at the end of it. We as players are free to axe who we want, when we want, and although we may miss out on quests, loot, and lore, we can still make it to the end and beat the game. The Murder Hobo build is less and less viable with the newer 3D games, when Fallout 3 started the trend of making all children NPCs completely invulnerable. Now this was likely done to sidestep the issue that Fallout 2 had, where the game couldn't be released in European markets unless children were removed entirely, because violence against children was a hard line. Fallout 3 went even further than that though, making plot essential NPCs invulnerable as well, like Sarah and Owen Lyons, who will just slump to the floor unconscious after we launch a fat man at their face. Wow, he took that like an absolute champ. He isn't even mad at me. Many Vault 101 NPCs are unkillable during the game's tutorial. Our father is invincible until, he isn't anymore. And the weapons vendor Shrapnel in Rivet City is invulnerable as well for some Adam-forsaken reason. New Vegas did a lot better in this regard, making the only truly non-killable NPC a robot known as Yes Man, who, yes, his physical body can be destroyed, but his personality just gets uploaded into another robotic body, and he's therefore functionally unkillable, but in a way that makes sense. Fallout 4 is the worst offender by making most of the first NPCs you interact with all essential, namely Preston Garvey and most of his group. It also didn't help that some of them were so insufferable as well, like Freak, Marcy, I get it, your life sucks, but I also just saved you, so how about you just chill out while I'm around, alright?
Sure, let me just stop what I'm doing to talk to you. I'm being sarcastic, leave me alone.
But even NPCs that aren't companions or that are essential to the main quest are included, like the Cabot family members and their helper Edward Deegan, who remained essential until the end of the Cabot House quest when deciding who to support. Similarly, the Overseer of Vault 81 and the Resident Doctor are also essential, the Doctor really only being important for the main side quest in the Vault. Hardly important for the main story. But I guess Bethesda really doesn't want us missing out on these side quests. Fallout 76 also has unkillable NPCs. They are the settlers and crater raiders that are found at their respective settlements, who completely ignore any attempt at damage. There is a fine line between wanting to make sure players experience the game that developers spent so long making and putting so many obvious guardrails in place that it becomes immersion breaking. Bethesda has threaded this needle before with Morrowind, where after killing an important NPC that is tied to quests, a notification that the character has doomed the world will pop up and suggest the player reload a save. There are also ways to let players have the freedom to mess up or simply decide one annoying mopey NPC that isn't required for the main story should be put out of their misery. This should stand, even if that means that it ruins the main quest, because this will lead into my next point, but early end game conditions are not a bad thing, and perhaps maybe even should be added to the games once again. Early endgame conditions are admittedly not very common even from early games, and they're not terribly common in many mainstream games as a whole, but these go hand in hand with the previous point about non-essential NPCs. The best example of an early ending for the first Fallout is, rather than destroying the Mariposa military base where super mutants are created and killing the Master in his underground lair, the player can choose to join the Master and his Unity when confronting him for the first time, resulting in an ending where we are unceremoniously unceremoniously dipped into a vat of FEV and turned into a super mutant. This exact ending can happen much earlier, however, before we have even explored half of the map. The town of Necropolis, which is inhabited by hordes of ghouls, has some super mutants stationed at their water pump, and interacting with Harry, who is the boss of this outfit, can lead to a situation where you agree to go with him to the Mariposa military base to meet the Master's right-hand man, the Lieutenant. Making any other choice at that point except to go out in a blaze of gunfire and glory will result in the same super mutant dipping cutscene, and your game is over. Now, if all you have done in that game is found the first several settlements, stumbled on Necropolis, accompanied the nice strong green gentleman to his boss, and then gave up all your information, you would get this ending and then be kicked right back to the starting menu. Maybe some people would think that they reached the end of the game, even though they didn't even solve their quest or explore half the map or figure out who these hulking green dudes are at all, but I would wager most people would understand this was not the real ending and would likely load their save and do something different. But what is so cool about this ending is it shows a real consequence for your actions, that if you give in to the Master or his mutants, that you become one in the end, and the game isn't holding your hand or limiting your choices. I would love for early alternate endings to become a thing. Show me what happens when I go full murder hobo and kill all NPCs, or make a critical choice with an obvious bad outcome like siding with the Enclave or something. One of the great things about Fallout is learning about how your choices affected the ending. We like to see the consequences and possibilities of our actions, and I see these early alternate endings to be just as interesting and follow the core doctrine of allowing player choice. Something that I and many others have wanted to see implemented in a future Fallout game is a more dynamic wasteland, where many of the smaller groups, be they raiders, settlements, or any other minor faction, can be helped or hindered in their ambitions to expand and grow. It would make sense that if I went and cleared out every location that hosted super mutants, that rather than all of them being completely reoccupied by mutants like I had never even been there before, maybe some of them would instead be occupied by rival raider groups or settlers. Although no game has quite implemented a dynamic wasteland in such a way, Fallout 2 did use an interesting power counting system to tell us which of the crime families of New Reno would rise above all others, and it was tied to the choices that we made and things that we did in the game. The four families, the Bishops, Mordinos, Salvatores, and Wrights, are all locked in a struggle of domination of the city of New Reno and its lucrative markets of gambling, prostitution, and drug peddling. But that town ain't big enough for the four of them. Different actions will have effects with a point number attached, and all families start at a power level of 9,000. 100 at the start of the game. Killing a low-level employee of the family like a guard or bartender at one of their establishments will reduce their power level by a single point each time, and killing the boss of any of the families will instantly drop their score to 0, dealing a huge blow to the group. There are faction-specific actions. The Mordinos profit heavily off of all the addictive jet that is used and abused by so many in New Reno and Redding, because they are the sole proprietors and producers of the chem. This is thanks to the same awful boy genius that has come up at least twice already in this video, Myron, who formulated the chem, and their operations will sustain a huge hit if Myron is killed, decreasing the score by 20. I'm just gonna shoot him in the dick again for old time's sake. The Bishops, who are acting as middlemen for the NCR, organize raider attacks on Vault City to try and wear them down, so they will eventually meet the NCR at the bargaining table and join the growing Republic. But finding and killing these raiders, who are working for the Bishops, will cause a large drop in the Bishops' power as well. The Salvatores are actively trading with the Enclave chemicals for the Enclave's FEV project in return for laser weaponry that they can use to gain an advantage against the other families. If this trade is interrupted at all though, it will cost 20 points to their power counter. The Wright family gets most of its money from supplying alcohol to the rest of the families, so destroying their stills decreases their power by 20 points, and killing any named family members will have a notable effect as well. At the end, depending on what you, the player, have done, the family with the most points at the end will be the ones to exert control over New Reno, and any ties in power level will default to the following order: the Mordinos as the default winners, followed by the Bishops, then the Salvatores, and finally the Rights. This completely hidden mechanic is very analogous to the dynamic, inconsequential wasteland that so many of us want to see. For example, for the Fallout 4 raider groups that are distinct with their own name and leader, it would be cool to see them grow or be wiped out based on our actions. I would spend so much time claiming settlements and ground for a minor faction that I love. Move over, Minutemen, the Atom Cats deserve to run the Commonwealth. Alright, this last one is a bit heavy, but Fallout has rarely shied away from such things. Slavery is and continues to be something encountered in the Wasteland. With the breakdown of the rule of law, might became right, and if you weren't strong enough to stand on your own, you would get subjugated. Although the institution of slavery has not featured prominently in every single Fallout game, it is mentioned, referenced, or seen in every single one. Fallout 2 was the first game that introduced large-scale slavery, with towns like the Den deriving a huge amount of their economic activity from the slave trade, and other settlements like Vault City having their very society based on what they call servitude, which is just a nice way to say slavery, no matter what they try to tell us. Slaves are used as test subjects by the Enclave, and even the NCR has slave pens just outside of their capital. We are free to involve ourselves with the slave trade, being forced to get a slaver tattoo on our forehead, which earns us a reputation and impacts how others in the world interacts with us. Fallout 3 also had an enormous emphasis on slavery. A huge slave operation is thriving in Paradise Falls, and we can get in on the action by using a special device to go and claim slaves ourselves. The Pit DLC also showed us that the remains of Pittsburgh, in its twisted, toxic, and radioactive setting, only exists because an upper raider caste heavily subjugates a slave labor force who routinely die in the pursuit of their leader's dream of turning this hellhole into something worth governing. I think I know what he'll be governing in a few seconds.
Baby, it's just you.
Although Fallout 3's biggest punishment for engaging in slavery is losing karma, which can easily be gamed, being able to actively capture slaves and disrupt the existing slaver status quo was a unique addition. Fallout 4 of course had a slavery of its own kind, and whether you considered synths as people would impact your perception of how much slavery Fallout 4 really had. But even if you did consider the creation and use of synths as slavery, it wasn't quite the same as in Fallout 2 or Fallout 3. You know, it just hit differently. Like, here's a dude cutting metal, breathing in toxins while turning into a mutated monster, and here's a guy on guard duty. Aside from synths, we can sell Billy the controversial ghoul kid to a gunner for some money, and the Nuka World DLC shows us raiders that have taken over the old amusement park and forced the original settlers there to work as slaves, either fighting animals or being used as their food, being little toys for the disciples to cut up, or as laborers and merchants. Fallout 76 also doesn't have much in the way of slavery. The main raider group at the crater actually has a stance against slavery, which is pretty weird for a raider group, although a man named Sargento has started a combat arena in Watoga that uses slaves as combatants. I would like to see slavery be represented like how it was in Fallout 2 and 3. Have it be something we can fight against, but with real economic consequences, or something we can join and reap caps from human misery. It has been such an interesting part of past games that bringing it back in a vein similar to Fallout 2 and 3 would make the post-nuclear world of Fallout feel so much more appropriate. Give us even more choices and opportunities for roleplay, and overall make the world more interesting. That is it. What are your thoughts? Do you agree with any of these, and would you like to add any of your own? As always, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on the matter, but I just want to say thanks for being here and joining me on this fresh new year, which is going to have some big changes both in my personal life, but also for the channel. So stick around if you want to see that. And if you like what I do, support me like one of these lovely people either on Patreon or YouTube. Without all of you, I simply couldn't do what I do and produce this content. Special welcome to Bree Hillier and Fleetwood DeVore on YouTube, and thanks to Sean DeMonica, White Fang, and Switchblade for rejoining as well. As always, special recognition to the top tier patrons who give their all to Atom: Acrid B, Gardner Minshew Simp, Dami Double, Tapey Papey, Juan Vader, The Breadman, Tyler Eaton, Owen Balzer, Ann94, Tessa Storm, Unky Nick, GSK Lego, Shallow Fire 13, Nathaniel Jolling, Tater Anus, and Ace Jacobs. Atom is pleased. Take care of yourselves, everyone. Stay in Atom's everlasting glow, and I will see you soon.